Hey guys, welcome back. So as always, as I like to start with, just a massive thank you to everyone who has liked, shared and subscribed. Please keep going. Your support really means a lot to me. I do want to apologise obviously for the very short video I did last week. As explained, it was just kind of difficult getting hold of that information. I had to go through various news outlets, but a lot of the news outlets, they just mainly report the same information over and over. As explained, as much as I do try and research these cases, I don't have the sources to go through the courts or anything like that. I don't have the power to go through the courts. So it is literally just going through news reports, going through documentaries, just I can talk about the basics. But I do really appreciate each of you. I try and cover cases that are not well known, and obviously, like I said, I want to do the next few weeks based on cold case. So today's case is that one that happened only 3 days prior to the murder of Penny Bell that we spoke about last week. Just around the corner as well, so really close proximity of what happened with Penny. And that is the murder of Alison Shaughnessy that we're going to be speaking about today. So, with that all said and done, we're just going to get into the story of Alison, who she was as a person, and what actually happened to her. So, Alison Blackmore, she was born on the 7th of November 1969 in London to a really large, really close Irish family. She and her younger brother Robert, they would actually spend a lot of their childhood visiting Pilston in County Kilkenny in Ireland. And at the age of 16, Alison, so this was in 1986, Alison began working as a clerk for a branch of Barclays Bank in London. And this is where she met her future husband, John Shaughnessy. And John was actually 10 years her senior. So he was 26 at the time of meeting, and Alison was 16. So John, he had quite a lot in common with Alison. He had only just emigrated over from Ireland. Obviously her family were from Ireland. And he began working for a place called Churchill Clinic in Lambeth. And John lived within the staff accommodation that was available to the staff members. And this is when he ends up getting into a relationship with Alison. But whilst he was in this relationship with Alison, he formed a really close relationship with a female colleague by the name of Michelle Taylor. Michelle was 18, and she and John lived within the same accommodation, practically only 2 doors away from each other. So the relationship between John and Alison, it goes really strong. It moves at a steady pace. In April 1989, they actually get engaged. So Alison's parents, Bobby and Breda, said that they were really apprehensive about the upcoming marriage, about the engagement, as Alison hadn't really had a lot of experience in the dating world. She, like I said, obviously she was only 16 when she met John, and obviously there's a massive time difference, not just the age gap, but obviously a massive wealth of experience within that 10-year age gap. John would have had previous relationships, whereas this was Alison's first serious relationship. And they repeatedly asked her, "Are you sure that John is the one?" Alison's reassuring them that he was, and she then just obviously delved herself into planning her perfect wedding. And it was said that her and John, they put equal amount into planning this wedding. And they actually chose the date for the 23rd of June 1990, and this was they were going to get married in their hometown of Pilston. And Breeder recalls that on the morning of the wedding, Alison was she was just too excited to think about any sort of imperfections that were going on during the day. Breeder said that when Alison put on her dress, she noticed a little tear in the bodice, and she pointed this out. She was like, "Oh, do you want me to sort it out?" Alison was like, "No, absolutely fine." It doesn't. She actually said it doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference. She felt that she was just excited to start her new life at this point. Now, among the guests of the wedding was Michelle, with another guest actually recording Michelle kissing John on the cheek. And after the wedding, Alison then moved in with John into the staff accommodation. But it was noticed by the others that John and Michelle were spending quite a lot of time together. With Alison's brother Robert said that when he would visit his sister, Michelle would just come knocking, but she wouldn't take any notice of anyone else that was visiting or anyone else that was in the flat other than John. She would just literally walk in, not even say hello to anyone other than making a beeline straight for John. And in January 1991, John and Alison, they move out of the accommodation and into a flat that was 41 Vardens Road, and this was in Battersea, and this was around 400 metres away from Clapham Junction Station. And prior to moving to Battersea, Alison's family raised concerns about John and Michelle, with Robert recalling staying one night at the staff accommodation, and there was a knock at the door about 1 a.m. And this turned out to be Michelle, and she wanted to see John. And Alison just felt that Michelle was irrelevant to her marriage, irrelevant to her life, and it's believed that the feeling was reciprocated. Alison and Michelle just really didn't get on, but Alison didn't see or didn't suspect John of having the affair. So on Monday, the 3rd of June 1991, Alison finishes work at a usual 5 p.m. and she begins making her way back home. Her colleagues spoke out and said that Alison has been spending most of the day speaking about plans for her and John and to start beginning their family, and that they wanted to move back to Ireland to raise their family. And later that evening, John had finished work at the Churchill Clinic and he was off to lift back to the Varden Road flat by Michelle. Michelle said that she actually wanted to come in and say hi to Alison, so complete juxtaposition of what Alison's brother Robert was saying about her. So they arrived home at 8:30 p.m. and at the top of the stairs was Alison. And sadly, Alison was laying in a pool of blood, and it was quick to see, and it was ascertained that she had actually been stabbed 54 times. So it was clear to the investigators that it had been a frenzied attack. So Alison was found laying fully clothed, lying down on her face, with visible wounds to her hands and her legs. And only 3 of those wounds were considered quite deep, with the other 51 being described as just minuscule pinprick wounds. And the pathologist examining Alison said that the wounds and the amount were just unnecessary, and it shouldn't have taken 54 stabs to kill her. He added that it was a clear case of rage. It was clear someone was venting really strong emotions towards Alison. He said that the shallow depth of the wounds meant it was possible that it was a woman who had carried out the attack, as they had not been done with great strength. he concluded that the attack would only have lasted about 2 to 3 minutes, and it looked as if Alison had tried to fight them, and she would actually have been conscious when the killer had stabbed her another 24 times when she was on the floor. And this was all in front of her body. The killer had actually stabbed her in the neck and also cut her windpipe. She continued to be stabbed, like I said, while she was laying on the floor, and it was established that Alison would have got home around 5:37 p.m. and she had been killed minutes after. The home had no signs of a break-in, and she even had time to stop and pick up her post. So this suggested that the killer had travelled with Alison, and the investigators looked at the windows, they looked at the drain pipes, they looked at the exterior of her flat, they looked up on the roof, and they concluded that if an intruder had broke in, they would have gone through one of those routes to gain entry to the building. They said there would have been fingerprints, scuff marks, shoe prints, but they did find nothing. But 2 sets of fingerprints were actually found on the back other side of the front door, so like the inside part of the front door. So police began looking at John, which again is the same as what I spoke about with the Penny Bell video. When they looked at her husband, they're going to look at Alison's husband, going to look at John. You know, we all know that in a case like this, it's usually someone who knows the victim, who's quite close to the victim. But John was quickly eliminated from any suspicion. He had a cast iron alibi there, the fact that he was actually at work at the Churchill Clinic at the time. But they begin looking at John's behaviour prior to the murder. So this is really, really similar to what happened with the inquiry into Penny Bell. So they established that John and Michelle had actually been having an affair throughout his relationship with Alison. Michelle believed that she and John were actually lovers and believed that they had a potential for a long-term relationship. Michelle said that she had been a virgin before she met John, and that he had asked her to go on the pill so they could maintain their relationship without any sort of complications, i.e. her falling pregnant. She added that John was her first true love, and it was found that the night before his wedding to Alison, John and Michelle had actually been together having sex, and Michelle said that they also had sex on the morning of the wedding. She said that she had organised and paid for John's stag night, and in return John paid for her flight to Ireland and paid for her hotel room. So on the 24th of July 1991, the police then conduct a search on Michelle's room, and they come across a diary which Michelle had been detailing every thought and feeling surrounding John, putting pen to paper. She also included her thoughts about Alison, with one passage reading, "My dream solution would be for that Alison to disappear as if she never existed." So police believed this to be a motive for Michelle to kill Alison, and in 3 statements made, Michelle didn't mention her affair, but when asked if she knew John had had any affairs, she stated that he had indeed, but these were with other women. She said that she didn't know John or Alison that well. She had definitely never been to the Vardens Road flat, and Michelle said that when she entered the flat with John for the first time, she had attempted to pick up Alison, and that's why any links had been made. So obviously if they found any DNA belonging to Michelle and Alison's body, that was the reason why. So obviously just trying to defer the blame away from herself. The police, however, they believe that the reason that she tried to pick up Alison, it was all intentional. So they just carry on digging and looking. So the fingerprints that were mentioned were then to be found to be a match to Michelle. So bearing in mind, obviously, Michelle, she was 18 when she met John, so she was in her early 20s at this point. But the second set of prints were actually found to be belonging to Michelle's 18-year-old sister, Lisa. And Lisa was actually a frequent visitor to Michelle's accommodation when she lived at Churchill Road. The two were said to have been incredibly close, as most sisters are. And yeah, Lisa would escape from her home life and just come and stay with Michelle every now and then. So when Lisa was questioned, she also said that obviously she had never been to the Vardens Road flat, despite saying that she had actually been with Michelle all that afternoon. And a few days later, a neighbour of John and Alison's, called Dr. Unsworth Jones. Sorry, read the wrong line. So Dr. Unsworth White, sorry. He come forward and said that on the 3rd of June, he saw two women leaving number 41 in a hurry. He said that he'd never seen either one before, and that one of them had a ponytail, and this particular style of hair was one that Lisa always had. He said that this was around 5:45 p.m. and Dr. Unsworth White positively ID'd Lisa during an identity parade. And not long after, a friend of the sisters, Jeanette Tapp, she come forward and she gave an alibi saying that she had been with the sisters from around 5:15 onwards, all the time staying at the Churchill Clinic. Now, on the 7th of August 91, police then arrested Michelle, Lisa and Jeanette, and this is all on the suspicion of Alison's murder. And during the questioning, Michelle finally opened up about her affair with John, and when asked how she felt about Alison, she replied, "When you see a person and you don't see the other person with him, you still feel like you're boyfriend and girlfriend and there's no one else there." So police believed Michelle had killed Alison as she had found out about the plans for them to move to Ireland, and as she wanted to have John to herself. Lisa, however, she was less forthcoming and she just replied no comment to every single one of her interviews. And Jeanette, who had given 2 statements providing alibis, then basically admitted that she lied to, in fact, cover for her friends. So Jeanette had actually been shopping with her mother and hadn't come home till about 7:15 p.m. And that's when she found Michelle and Lisa waiting and saying that they'd been there since 5. So police then informed the sisters that the alibi had fallen, and the lawyers come in and they basically instruct the sisters to not say anything else. So the police then searched Taylor's family home on the 7th of August and they find a 10-inch knife, and their father, Dell, he says this was his. So he was then arrested on suspicion of possession of a dangerous weapon. That would have been in September. And it was established that Michelle and Lisa had actually gone back to Varden Road to wait for Alison. They claimed, it's believed, that they were waiting for John, or they were wanting to pick something up for him. And Alison, begrudgingly, she let them in, and that's when they followed her upstairs and they attacked her. So they were seen by Dr. Unsworth White leaving and getting into the car and speeding off, and were seen arriving back at the Churchill Clinic around 6 p.m. that day. So Michelle and Lisa were brought to trial in 1992 at the Old Bailey, and the case was considered really, really rare, really unique, and this caused a massive media frenzy. Like, every newspaper in the country was hooked on the story, and this began a frenzy circulating around the sisters on trial for killing a love rival, and the trial itself was covered and followed from beginning to end. So the jury was told of Jeanette's false alibi, and that she testified that Michelle really seemed calm during the whole investigation. And it was then pointed out in court that when the sisters said to Jeanette that they had been waiting since 5, that they were already creating their own alibi to cover their tracks before the murder. And this was all done well before the murder was finally discovered at 8:30 that night. So they needed the cover for the time frame of around 5 to 6 p.m. And the prosecution pointed out that only the killers would have done this, as they would know automatically what time frame they would need to cover. So Lisa then testified to say that she and Michelle had been shopping in Bromley all that afternoon, and that she hadn't actually taken any credit cards. This again was proven to be a lie, as she had actually used her card at 3:20 p.m. at a bank that was really close to the Churchill Clinic. So Michelle previously claimed that she and Lisa had never been to Vardens Road before. And then she said that during the trial, the only reason that their fingerprints were found on the door was the fact that they actually had gone round and cleaned the windows for Alison. And this was around 2 to 3 weeks prior to the murder. And this, again, was discredited, proved to be a lie. So a fingerprint expert, he comes in. And he insists that the prints were no older than 72 hours, so they were definitely not 2 to 3 weeks old. Michelle then said that she couldn't remember how she reacted when she saw Alison's body. So the prosecution, they put forward that Michelle's motive had clearly been indicated in her diary, with passages including, "I hate Alison, the unwashed bitch. My dream would be for Alison to disappear, like she never existed, and then maybe I could give everything to the man that I love." So obviously very, very similar along the lines of the previous passage that was read out earlier on. So Michelle said that the affair between her and John had actually ended months before Alison's death, but John then takes a stand and he says that this is a lie, and said that they had actually been having sex as recent as 3 weeks prior to Alison's murder. So Michelle said that she felt really jealous of Alison and that she loved John despite their affair potentially dying off. No pun intended, that's just literally Michelle's words. So the Crown argued that John and Alison's imminent move to Ireland meant that Michelle only had a short amount of time to try and get John for herself. Michelle actually testified that she had prayed that the wedding would have been called off, and prosecution, they alleged that John had told Michelle only days before that he was stopping their flower arrangements. So the two would meet up regularly on a Monday to do flower arranging, and this was the day that the pair would actually meet up to have sex. So this actually led to what they believed Michelle killing Alison, and they put it forward that Michelle would believe with Alison out of the way, John would run into her arms and their affair would continue and they would end up falling in love, and Michelle would finally get her man. So John then goes back up and he said that Michelle had tried to resume their sexual relationship after the murder, and Michelle countered this, saying that it was him, but either way, whoever it was, it came out that the pair had actually had sex only 10 days after Alison's funeral. So the background was then looked into of the sisters. So obviously, as already stated, Lisa and Michelle were quite close, which is the only reason that Lisa was brought into this. And it was shown that Michelle had a real keen interest in knives and weapons. She actually kept all of these beside her bed when she slept at night. So really, really similar to the case of Catherine Knight from Australia. If you guys are familiar with that case, she done very similar. She went to an abattoir, really proud of her knife collection, and she would sleep with the knives on the wall above her bed. So really, really similar. If you're not familiar with that case, I suggest you look it up. It's really, really interesting case. Happened around 20 odd years ago, but one of the most notorious cases that have come from Australia. So they then look at Lisa, and it was ascertained that Lisa had a real deep history with violence. She had actually stabbed a dog to death on South-on-Sea. Both the sisters had taken part and were really good with jiu-jitsu. So they put that forward in the argument that the girls were really able to take care of themselves. The defence barrister, Lady Malaliu, I apologise if I'm butchering that. I don't know how it's pronounced. I'm just trying to pronounce it how it feels in my head. She said that where the evidence is thin or non-existent, as it is in this case, the temptation to guess or speculate is enormous, but guesswork and speculation are not evidence, and nor is suspicion. She added that it was more likely that Alison had been murdered by an intruder, and that the frenzied nature of the attack and Alison's injuries were characteristic of a cornered intruder. So she tried to put forward that Alison disturbed someone who was attempting to burgle the home, and that this person lashed out in an attempt to flee, which doesn't really make any sense. They would, if that was the case, they would probably only have stabbed maybe once, maybe twice, and then fled. They wouldn't hang around to stab someone 54 times. I feel. I could be wrong, but it's just my opinion on the matter. So at the end of the trial, the jury, they went away to deliberate, and after 5.5 hours, they found the Taylor sisters guilty by a unanimous verdict. Both of those were sentenced to a life term, and with Lisa only being 19 at the time, she was under 21 when this law came into force. So she was ordered to serve the first 3 years in a Young Offenders Institute, but Michelle was sent to HMP Holloway. And after the sentencing, many media journalists, they actually began supporting the Taylors, and they campaigned for their release. That despite the evidence, the sisters' characters showed that they were innocent. So I really don't know what the media were reading at the particular time. I don't know what they were listening to. From what I've read recently, I've only recently heard about this case. What I've just read out, does that sound like someone who's innocent to you guys? it really doesn't. But apparently, yeah, like their characters all showed that these women were innocent. So one of these was Bob Woffenden, who campaigned to free prisoners he believed were wrongly imprisoned. And this was someone like, he was a massive supporter of James Hanratty. So James Hanratty, he was found guilty in the 60s for murdering his girlfriend, I believe. I've got to re-look into that case. It might be one that I might cover in the future. But with this support, he was actually given a pardon, James Hanratty, and he was actually later found guilty again for the exact same crime, but this was posthumously, so this was after he had died. So Bob said that it must be innocent because it was an unusual case and 2 women couldn't have carried out the murder. He added that the press coverage around Michelle was outrageous. Yes, we can agree that obviously the press coverage probably was outrageous. They, want to latch onto a story, but I don't agree with the fact that he's saying that 2 women couldn't carry out the murder. I know this was before this story broke out, but I've just got a couple of names: Rose West, Joanna Dennehy. I don't know. One was part of a partnership with a man, one acted alone, but just 2 women that were capable of murder, very sadistic. So I really don't know what Bob was reading. I don't know what the media was reading, but I carry on. So a filmmaker, Bernard O'Mahony, he's a filmmaker and an author. He also campaigned, and he later admitted to intimidating witnesses to build up a defence for the sisters. And he actually, in the future, went on to have a relationship with Michelle. And he wrote a book around the case in 2001. And he said that he later became really suspicious of Michelle due to her really obsessive behaviour. And he found a letter pointing to her guilt, and he confronted her about this letter. And he said that she broke down and actually confessed. And Bernard then does a complete 360 on his feelings, and he began doing a campaign to have the sisters reconvicted. Michelle and Lisa's mother, Anne Taylor, she then spoke out, and she made an appeal to the people of Ireland, and she was asking for support. And she said that, "I believe my daughters are victims of the British justice system just as much as the Birmingham Six or the Guildford Four." So for the people you are not familiar with those stories, they were a group of people who were falsely accused of the IRA bombings in the UK back in the late 80s, early 90s, I believe. They ended up serving quite a long time in prison, and then it was later found out that they were actually completely innocent and they were pardoned, but they got a really, really raw deal. And so she's pleading with people of Ireland to look at the cases and comparing what's happened with her daughters to what happened with those people. So in 1993, so after a year of serving inside, Michelle and Lisa, they go to the Court of Appeal to have their convictions overturned. And a major piece of evidence that had actually been missed out at the trial was brought forward. So in informal notes that were taken by an officer at the time who took Dr. Unsworth White's account of the event, or what he witnessed, this was actually shown and read out in court. And in writing, it was shown that Dr. White had said that one of the women could have been black. but he had then corrected himself and said that they were both definitely white. And the defence, however, stated that it showed that the notes showed Michelle and Lisa couldn't have been there to carry out the murder, and it should have been shown at the previous trial. So prosecution QC John Nuttin also, he was criticised for his defence of the conviction after he said that the document that had not been discussed was unjustifiable, and he just basically said the investigators were sorry. You know, obviously sorry is never really good enough in these kind of circumstances. If you're trying to get a conviction and actually do your job, then something fails along the way, then yeah, a simple sorry really isn't good enough, really. So the Met police officers who investigated the case said that it amounted to capitulation. So on those grounds, and concluding the press may have actually influenced the trial, the Court of Appeal, they acquitted Lisa and Michelle. So after spending 1 year in prison, they were actually free to go. John was really, really angry about this, and he said that he wanted a retrial, and a retrial was actually spoken about and put forward, but it was later chucked out of court, as it was believed that because of the press intrusion, it was believed that a fair trial couldn't take place. So you would think, you know, the sisters would be proud to have their freedom, they would want to stay away from the courts, but no. In the following years, they attempted to sue various people for what they believed was wrongdoing. I'm staying on the side of not believing they're guilty, not believing they're innocent, because no one knows what actually happened. It's a lot of hearsay, like she said, he said. The evidence that was shown, it points, in my opinion, towards the guilt of Michelle, but I can't really definitely 100% say, if I'm honest. But in July 1995, the Taylors they attempted to prosecute the newspapers involved in the case, but the High Court of London rejected this. The defence teams claimed that the media resorted to O.J. Simpson-style reporting, but the High Courts countered and said that the image of John and Michelle kissing at the wedding with the headline "Cheater's Kiss" cannot be said to be an inappropriate description. They had undoubtedly cheated on Alison, and this expression is commonly used within a sexual relationship that John and Michelle had. And it was further said that it was difficult to see how an article in the South London Press saying how their alibi had been torn to shreds had been prejudiced. How that article would have prejudiced the jury. The judge commented and said, "I think the jury would be well able to appreciate that it was an assessment of the witness that mattered." And 5 years later, in July 2000, it was revealed that the Taylors had instigated a compensation claim against the police for their imprisonment. But this again was dropped when a civil case investigation began exposing evidence of the witness intimidation. So obviously, like I said earlier, with Bernard O'Mahony, who apparently intimidated witnesses, and this was obviously brought forward in this compensation claim. So after this final nail in the coffin, so to speak, the sisters they have since made no attempts at other compensation bids. It's said that they have actually both married and they have gone on to have their own families and basically lived their lives sort of secluded. John also, he got married to a woman called Caroline, and they had an interview in 1998 about their feelings towards Michelle and Alison. Both of them just basically said, that they both should still be in prison. When asked about her feelings on John and his affair, she just basically said, show me someone who hasn't got a skeleton in their closet. And then, yeah, obviously, she's with her new husband. She's going to take his side, but I don't know. If it had been proven in court that your husband's a cheat, and, it's like the old saying, once a cheat, always a cheat. Who knows? He may be a changed man. So, John and Caroline, they actually ended up moving back to Ireland to begin raising their own family. So, obviously, fulfilling the part of the dream that he had with Alison in the beginning. In September 2000, the Met Police actually attempted to reopen the case. And they did. They looked into it, and this reopening lasted for around 18 months. But no new evidence or suspects could be found, and it was decided to no longer investigate, and they said that they were closing the case for good. And it was considered to, at the moment, charge Lisa and Michelle with perjury or perverting the course of justice, as they, due to a law in place in the UK at the time, they couldn't be retried for murder due to a double jeopardy law. But Alison's family, obviously, they have never ever stopped believing in the Taylor sisters being guilty. Like I said, obviously we have to be careful with that kind of thing. We all going to have our own opinions. My opinion is all the evidence that I've read out points towards guilt, but I could be wrong, so I'm not going to really say much more on that, if I'm honest. And then just a final bit on this. So the double jeopardy law, that was actually changed in 2005, and this allowed individuals in certain circumstances to be retried for crimes after a previous acquittal. But as of 2024, no further evidence has materialised. And for now, the case of Alison Shaughnessy, it still remains closed. And so this is where the story sadly ends for Alison and her family. As always, and with the video I did last week on Penny, I really hope that someone out there watches this and it might jog their memory of something that happened that day. I know we're talking about over 30 years ago. I appreciate that, but it could trigger something, and hopefully Alison's family will finally get the answers that they so deserve. As always, I just want to thank every single one of you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe, leave a comment, and I will see you guys next week for the next True Crime Stories with Silhouette. For now, take care, and I will see you next Friday.